Hello everyone and welcome to a video recording of one of our recent interactive Q&A sessions. My name is Naveen Agarwal and I want to welcome you to take a look at this in case you missed our session, which we do every month. This was the last session of the year, so it was really special. We discussed a case study from a recent FDA warning letter that has a lot of implication on how you define your risk management process, particularly around how you define severity ratings and how they link to your complaint investigation. So we talked a lot about that. We also talked about some challenges, some concerns and emerging issues and uncertainties around EU-MDR compliance for risk management. A lot of unanswered questions, and there's a lot of ambiguity about what is the best way to prepare when you submit your documentation to your notified bodies. So we had a good discussion about that. And finally, we closed with the latest update on ISO 14971 harmonization in Europe. So take a look. Those of you who are already a member of our free knowledge sharing forum will get a link to view the full recording. And if you're not, there's a link below which you can access and join our forum for free. I invite you to participate in our forum and engage with your colleagues in a very casual, informal way. Ask questions, share knowledge. That's what it's all about. I wish all of you a very happy holiday and a happy new year, and I look forward to seeing you next year. So, of course, there are many warning letters, but the reason I'm selecting this for discussion is because it relates to risk management very, very closely and something that I have seen in practice to be a challenge. So here, they are actually citing against the complaints procedures. So failure to establish and maintain adequate procedures for receiving, reviewing, and evaluating complaints by a formally designated unit. But let's dig into what they are finding. Specifically, your firm's procedure titled Customer Feedback and Complaint Entry, which requires a device returned for further investigation when the complaint contains keyword of injury, illness, or death with a harm and is assigned a severity score of blank for a given harm as defined in the harms and severity table guidelines is inadequate. So they have a harm severity table, which a lot of people have, and they have severity ratings for different harms. Now they are utilizing those severity ratings in their complaints procedures to make decisions about requesting devices back for investigation. That's what is happening. And FDA is finding a problem with that. So why? Harms such as allergic reaction, chemical burns, hypoxia, and hypercapnia are given a score of blank, although the potential for severity of harms may be higher. So FDA is actually questioning their severity ratings. For example, you received a complaint which alleged a user had to be taken to the hospital via ambulance to receive oxygen because your device was not producing the proper amount of oxygen. The alleged harm of hypoxia was assigned a severity of blank, and the unit was not requested for further investigation. So the underlying theme here is inadequate or maybe not correct assignment of severity ranks, but they're citing against the complaints procedure. That's what they can do based on the QSR requirement. So I wanted to bring this to you as an introduction, and I want to open the floor for discussion about, does this seem kind of familiar to you in terms of the challenge you face internally when assigning severity levels? What kind of challenges you face and what best practices you can share. So I will open the floor for discussion on that. And let me stop sharing for a while. That way we can see some conversation on this.
Yeah, this is assigning severity is a challenge because especially for bigger companies and even medium-sized companies, there's going to be inconsistency across different groups and different products. Some companies try to create standard tables that describe the types of injury and assign it the type of severity ranking, and then therefore to create consistency. At Medtronic, we use what we call medical safety clinicians, who are medical doctors or nurse RNs, nurses, to give opinion. So we don't allow engineers to assign severity ratings on harms. This is one way we are trying to be consistent and accurate.
Mm-hmm. That's good suggestion there. Other thoughts?
So,
what do you guys think?
So as Greg, I would say in my practice for many years with medical imaging products, so always in our risk assessment groups, we would have a clinical person or two, but then we would also pull in whoever might be needed for a particular type of incident or a particular question to establish severity. And then we also typically would take our output document and have them reviewed by a physician that was we had a relationship with. So we I felt that we've done a pretty thorough job of trying to get pretty accurate or reasonably accurate on our harms level of harms. And as my practice had been to establish a harms table for a particular product. So and also since I was in a larger company and different divisions were doing risk assessments and let's say for burn, for instance, we would not want a disagreement or a mismatch between the severity that one group assigned to that as opposed to another group. So we shared that information across our business lines quite a bit too. So
actually, I was gonna actually make that point as well. What happens first? Do you review this with a panel of clinicians or just one or two people? And the second, what happens if you have disagreements among the clinicians? How do you resolve those? That would be an interesting question to think about. And what do you guys do in terms of best practices?
I mean, go ahead.
Go ahead, Greg.
I was just because our practice had been that we always had at least one clinical person in our cross-functional review for risk topics, and that was kind of our starting point. So that person may be fully knowledgeable to assign a severity, or they may say that we are going to pull in other people, which we definitely would do. So particularly when we had things like image artifact, for instance, was always one that had a lot of discussion around it, because if a let's say a CT image had an artifact, and so it was really a judgment between a group of people to say what's the potential severity of something like that. Can it lead to a false negative, false positive scenario?
Yeah, so some discussion. Go ahead,
Yes.
Bijan. You were about to say something. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, I was going to say that, there is typically, but I should say typically, sometimes there are disagreements. One clinician may have a different opinion than another. I'm not really sure. The way we try to handle that was by creating a master list of harms that has a description of harms and different types of perceived symptoms. Like if a patient is bleeding, or they're unconscious, or what kind of treatment do they need, and then you give them the proper severity ranking. But I've actually seen resistance from some of these clinicians. They say, like, don't tell me how to think. Let me make my own decision. So I don't know. I haven't come across a situation where we have had two clinicians simultaneously judging one circumstance and giving different opinions. They seem to agree among themselves, talk among themselves, and they come up with one ranking.
Yes, that's great. Anybody else has any thoughts, especially our colleagues from the industry? What is top of mind for you when we talk about severity?
Well, Naveen, let me bring
Go ahead,
up
Ed.
that the harms need to be identified in your risk management plan, at least at that point, because you are required to assign risk acceptability, and that means you have to establish what the probability scales look like, what the harms look like, and that's best done by a panel of medical professionals. And that panel has the requirement to reach consensus. And I know there's lots of people out there that have big egos in the medical world and have a difficult time, but it can be done, and it is a useful exercise. I once consulted with a major company that had one product line, basically, and they had a master harms table that was used for all models of the products that they created, and that was the final call on everything was from that master harms table. And it worked quite well.
Yep.
Because it did, as was indicated, promote consistency across product lines and within products as well. Because one of the things I've often seen within risk analyses is a harm was judged at one level at the beginning of the risk analysis, and as you went down further, you might see that same harm occur again and have a different rating. And boy, did the regulators and the auditors dig into that when that occurred. So you definitely want consistency. You need it to be established in advance of developing the product and not be adding these things in later on, unless there is real justification in doing that. Now, certainly, one of the things we know is that as we start product development, things change through the life of the product, and new issues come up, and design changes result in new hazards. So it has to be flexible enough for that, but the best practice is to have a very solid scaling system put in advance, rating all the harms.
Well, in this situation, we are seeing that they did have a standard table. I think the topic that concerns me is FDA found deficiency in the fact that they actually second-guessed their severity ranking by citing examples from the field. So now, if they had recognized, based on the post-market data, that patient was rushed, ambulance, oxygen was given, and had things in motion to update the severity, maybe they would have managed to convince that, hey, we are keeping track of it. But I want to come back to this same question again. Yes, we want to reach consensus. And again, from the industry colleagues, my question would be, what do you try? I mean, it'll probably take great facilitation skills. So as risk managers, I think in the industry, when we practice, one lesson for me is that you need to be very good at facilitating a conversation about risk, especially among clinicians, because as we have already heard, they are, subject matter experts in that area. They have years of experience, and nobody likes to be challenged in that scenario. So you have to find a way to facilitate. But I really want to spend a few more minutes on this topic, understanding from the industry colleagues what challenges you guys are facing and how you are trying to resolve those. So anybody wants to offer their experience will be greatly appreciated.
Naveen, you brought up an interesting aspect of this, going back to the warning letter, because I did see the warning letter, and it was very interesting because there was two companies that produced the same product that have been cited recently. So apparently the FDA is going on a mission there. But anyway, Clause 10 of the 14971 requires you to have a feedback mechanism to update your risk management file. And that company apparently did not use that new information to update things correctly. So
I don't know for sure, Ed, either that or they still continue to believe that their rating was correct. So I don't know whether they did not follow up or if they followed up and decided that it was correct, and still FDA found that to be an issue. Now, this is the second example of severity related finding in warning letter I have come across. That's why I brought this up. So Christoph, were you about to say something? Anything on your mind, or anybody else from the industry?
I was, although I'm not sure how much we can contribute here, but so in general, this is very similar to our approach. So what we do is for each project, we define the project-specific severities of harm in a, let's call it a master list. And one of the and we, of course, we follow that then through. So we need to make sure that, as it has been pointed out, that we are consistent in our hazard analysis, in our risk analysis. One of the struggles that we often find is that the perspective, like the risk perspective, is pretty difficult to grasp for medical staff or clinicians. So in our, I don't know how it is in the US, but with us at least, it's like they don't. They say I can't tell you whether that's I don't know how to rate that risk. So our stress often is that we to get them to commit to a statement, and that often leads to a over assessment of the risk to be on the safe side rather than a critical assessment of each individual risk. Yeah, which is fine as long as you have, as the probability is low. But if you have something with, raising probability, then you would need to be you may need to go back to this.
So that's an important, interesting point, that you're actually having a hard time getting like a commitment from them or a confirmed opinion from them about what the risk level is or severity, either way. Great, thank you for sharing that, Christoph. Anybody else? Any thoughts?
I have a question actually, Naveen. Was this warning letter disagreeing with the ranking for the severity, or was it complaining that they don't have a mechanism for requesting products to be returned for investigation?
Well, they are specifically citing an example of hypoxia.
Yeah. And
they are saying in your master table, hypoxia has been assigned a severity rating of X. It's blanked out. We don't know what that is. But FDA is citing observation that in your complaints, you are showing us the patient was rushed to the hospital and oxygen was provided to them. So what they are saying is, we don't believe your severity rating. And as a result of this discrepancy, you did not request the product back for investigation. That's why your procedure is inadequate.
So they did have a mechanism for requesting product.
They did. They did.
Okay.
So the second question to the group is, does it make sense to link product investigation to a severity rating, and how effective that is in practice? And would the regulators be actually skeptical of that? I mean, they would expect product investigation for all compliance as much as possible. What justification do we have? And that's why I think you got into the trap of having a severity assignment. Now you're being challenged that your assignment is not correct. So I find it an interesting scenario. What do you guys think?
Was it implicit in that FDA warning letter that they agree with some kind of a threshold on severity below which they don't expect the company to request product return?
No, not at all. So they are just, and since they cannot, this is the thing about QSR too, right? You can cite only against what's written in the QSR. So they're citing it against complaints, but in my opinion, this is actually a risk management problem in execution. So they are not saying have a threshold. They're just saying your assignment is not right.
Yeah.
And that as a result, your complaint procedures are inadequate. That's what they're saying. But I think what they're getting at is that fix your severity assignment process.
That's the only thing that was being asked.
Right. Yeah. So,
but your question is that
it is a good practice to link product investigation to severity. What do you guys think?
I would. Yeah. Go ahead, Craig.
So, in my experience, always in a complaint, went through a risk assessment. First, an initial to say, does it even need to be reviewed by, for risk? And then secondly, you would do a risk assessment to decide not based on severity, but based on severity and probability. So what is the the level of risk? So I wouldn't tag it to severity, but I would tag it to level of risk.
That is
So
well said. And you could have a different extent of investigation based on the risk level or estimated risk level. But if you have a blanket statement that we would not request product back unless the severity is above a certain number, that's internal procedure. Then you find yourself having to explain this scenario that, hey, you didn't really use the right number.
yeah, I can see a problem with that.
Yeah. And Greg, I think there is an issue with using risk as the basis, although it seems as like a sound decision. But imagine you have made a product and released it, and then you get one complaint, one failure. At this point, you don't know what the risk is because you don't know what the probability that failure is. You have only one case. So then the only thing you have is the severity.
Right.
I think maybe over time, you will be able to estimate risk. But in the beginning, you have only one sample, and you have just one sample. So I think in that case, severity could be a good way to judge it. I think it's for the good of the company itself to investigate failures, probably of all failures, but at least for customer satisfaction, product reliability, right, even if it has nothing to do with safety. The company would want to know how the product is performing.
Yes.
So
this is a good point. Anybody else has any thoughts? I know we are probably can talk about this for a long time. What do you guys? But this is the real world situation, right? This real world problem that we face. Go ahead, Greg.
So I would say I agree with. I understand what you're saying, Bijan, and I agree actually. But probably process-wise, I would still say, if I know a severity and not the probability, I'm going to establish a risk level based on severity, as opposed to pointing to just the severity. I'm still going to say my risk level is high because I have a high severity and an unknown probability. So yes, you're effectively pointing towards severity, but just process-wise, just for clarity, I would expect that we're judging it on risk, not severity.
Mm-hmm.
Or tagging it, you know.
Well, it also depends upon the maturity. And I think that's why, in my opinion, having a PMS plan is actually a very good tool. You could have differentiated criteria for different products based on their maturity level. You don't have to apply one size fits all. So we can talk about the PMS plans and how it can be effectively deployed in future sessions, but I think there could be some value. Any last thoughts on this topic? Because there is one more which I would like to discuss today.
I think the flexibility part of it is important, Naveen, that you don't want to put yourself in the corner by limiting your ability to get the product back because your process didn't require something. So complaints are such that I think you need to have a ton of flexibility on how to proceed.
Yep. Great, thank you. So let me go to this next point, which was shared with me by Greg, and I'm glad, Greg, you are on. So maybe you can provide a little bit more context. I think this is important also in light of what Ed mentioned earlier on about harmonization of ISO 14971, EU-MDR, a lot of uncertainty and a lot of ambiguity still, especially items that are not explicitly covered in the standard. So you proposed this topic, and I think this is very interesting, is how to create risk management documentation to be EU-MDR compliant. And in the same context, how to ensure first pass success. Notified bodies are also confused. That's what I gather. But how to ensure success with them when submitting your documentation? What are some of the best practices about that, or some ideas around that? And I'll open again the floor for discussion.
So, Naveen, I'll say, so this question was initiated because of a webinar that I attended, Michelle Lott, and Ed, I believe you may have been there recently. It was about a week ago. It was
yes, I was.
Sponsored by Greenlight Guru. Michelle Lott, communicated how difficult it has been to get through the notified bodies and get compliance to the MDR. So, and one of her statements was try to get it as clean as possible for your first pass because, 3 strikes and you're out. But it's going to be extremely costly and both in dollars and time if you need to make revisions, or if you're going to get findings of whatever type. So anyway, the point was, I left that webinar saying, oh man, I mean, they've really raised the bar. We've got to up our game to make sure that we're as clean as possible when the submissions go to these notified bodies.
Yeah, and I think we are wondering, what does that mean? What does it mean, as clean as possible, right? I think that'll be a good point to discuss in terms of recommendations, best practices, suggestions, how to ensure that first pass success. And I think that's what we're trying to discuss here.
Well, one of the problems with the whole notified body situation is the change in Europe that is holding the notified bodies much more responsible, limiting their ability to tell you what's wrong because they can't consult. It's brand new. There's a ton of uncertainty here. And nobody knows actually which direction to go. Yeah. So it's unfortunate that it's gone this way, but there's a whole lot of things that have come together here. And the notified bodies now can be held very responsible and can be kicked out of the game if they don't do things right. So they're going beyond what the letter of the law says to try and figure out what the intent is and make sure that they're clean so that they don't have any problems.
Mm-hmm. So this is really being driven out of a lot of uncertainty and higher accountability. But is it possible for us to learn more about the expectations? Or has anyone already tried something that was provided some feedback? If you could share that in a non-proprietary way. I think what we are trying to do here is understand get some tips, some advice. What should be the first attempt in terms of organizing this documentation, making sure that this succeeds? How would we do it regardless of the new changes in EU-MDR? Let's talk about it from that point of view. What would good documentation look like?
Well, at a minimum, I think just following ISO 14971's expectations, that's just pretty straightforward. Have a plan, and within your plan, have your risk acceptance criteria. Some of those, basically have a PMS plan, post-market surveillance plan. Have all the elements that are called for in the various clauses of ISO 14971. It's I think, pretty straightforward. And then there's ISO TR 24971 that also gives you some advice that you can follow. There's one part that for EU-MDR that makes it a little bit ambiguous, and that is reducing risks as far as possible. Mm-hmm. Because even ISO 14971 doesn't give you advice on where is that point. So that's the only part that I think is a bit ambiguous that notified bodies could wrestle with you on. Mm-hmm. But other than that,
but you'll have to kind of define that clearly, what you mean by as far as possible without affecting benefit risks. Every company will have to kind of lay out that structure.
Right. You need to be able to, have your strategy documented as a requirement and be able to defend it. Just like in that letter you just submitted, the FDA did not agree with your decision. So you need to be ready to defend your decision and your method. And how do you know that you have reduced your risk as far as possible?
Yep. So there should be some framework, some criteria which are, they make sense and they are kind of defensible. But you have to outline that structure in the policy. Great point, Bijan.
Yeah. So I think one thing I could recommend is you can have a kind of a mock audit by yourselves, like internally. Have an internal, basically have devil's advocates. Mm-hmm. Challenge your documentation, pretend like you are the notified body, and ask questions, and then kind of, if you can pass your own internal audit, that should improve your likelihood of success first pass.
So maybe the suggestion I'm hearing you say is put this on the internal audit agenda.
Yeah.
Like make sure that you are paying attention to this, and maybe this is an agenda item or audit scope. Yeah. Give it more attention. in the internal audits and get better over time. Great point. Thank you for sharing that. I know, Ed, you are back in office, so your office by the seaside. Go ahead, please. You're on mute. If you could unmute and share your thoughts, that would be great.
Yes, there we go.
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Well, what I wanted to point out is there's one thing that is helpful, but doesn't cover all the cases. In 24971, I believe it's Annex E, talks about the use of international standards in risk management. And what it tells you is if a hazard is identified in a standard that you apply to your product, the risk is automatically unacceptable. You don't have to estimate severity and probability. It's done for you by that state-of-the-art international standard. The next step is to look for a recommended or required in the standard risk control measure. You apply that risk control measure, you verify in your design verification activities that that risk control measure was actually applied. In your design validation activities, you use the test that is specified in the standard.
Ed, excuse me. In the beginning of your sentence, you said that if you conform to the standard, your risk is automatically unacceptable. Did you mean acceptable?
No. If a hazard appears in the standard, then the risk for that hazard is automatically unacceptable.
Unless you
well now
what you are saying.
Because I'm going through the steps.
Yeah,
I'm starting your risk analysis on the left-hand side of the page if you have a paper one.
Got it.
Okay. And you record the hazard in your risk analysis from the standard, the risk is unacceptable. Okay. Then if you take the risk control that is established in the standard, you implement that risk control, you verify it's implemented, and you use the verification test that's specified in the standard, if there is one, to accept that, to show that you met the requirement of that standard, then the risk is automatically acceptable. You have no requirement to establish probability and severity for that particular hazard that's identified. So you can do a lot of things with the standards that you use in developing your device to reduce the amount of effort that you have to do because you've got some things that are already done for you, and you don't have to spend hours in meetings discussing should the probability be 2 or 3 and all those kinds of things. So that's going to be somewhat helpful, but it doesn't address this uncertainty because the MDCG has not come out with a guidance document for us yet. And, you know, plainly, the MDR and IVDR weren't ready when they instituted them because harmonized standards did not exist, guidance documents did not exist, still don't. So they instituted this thing way too early, and it's way too complicated. And there's some behind the scenes discussion that the European Parliament was actually hoping to get rid of a lot of devices off the market that were not what they really wanted. They just figured we could do with fewer devices, and that was part of the implementation of the MDR and IVDR.
Interesting.
Wow.
Definitely a lot of challenging times ahead. So Greg, I know maybe it doesn't provide a whole lot of answers. Probably it's going to be like a ongoing learning experience for us. Painful, yet it's a journey. So I would say that it should be, in my opinion, like make effort to understand it properly, lay out a structure, see what works for your organization, and try different things. But I know, guys, again, we have good discussions and we are almost close to the end. So anybody else, what else is on your mind, especially our industry colleagues?
something that just came up to my mind based on Ed's comment. So, I invite anybody who has an answer to this question. So let's say we have a collection of individual hazards, and we are measuring the risks. Maybe one or two of them are ones that there is a harmonized standards for which we can do the application of the standard, and we can say that that risk is not presumed to be acceptable. Now comes time to calculate your overall residual risk.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do with these acceptable risks? Do we just say, okay, these ones are acceptable, so let's set those aside and just look at the overall residual risk for the rest of them? Or do you include them?
Yeah. That is a very big individual residual risk versus overall residual risk has always been a very challenging topic, right?
Yeah.
For us to figure out how to do it. Yes.
So, back to the question, what do we do when we look at the overall? What do we do about those individual risks whose risk was presumed to be acceptable due to conformance to a standard?
Yeah, overall residual risk is supposed to be made up of all residual risk, acceptable or not. So you have to include them all.
And you have to probably look at how they contribute to the overall. And it's not like a summation or aggregation. There is no set formula. It's more of a discussion. But what I'd say, when you have those discussions, think of a framework that could drive that discussion and help people make the decision. Don't make it like a, ambiguous statement in your risk management report, which you cannot stand behind. But if you have a framework for helping people evaluate, write it down. Because people who are auditing you also don't have a straight answer how it should be done. But if you have not written it down, they will question the ambiguity of your conclusion. But if you have written it down, makes sense, you have practiced it, you are continually improving it, I think you'll have a better chance of communicating individual residual risk and overall. There is no right or wrong answer here, by the way, I think. But make a framework, right? Bijan, I see you.
Yeah,
I think it, but maybe you have some other thoughts on it.
No, I feel satisfied. I understand. So I'm good.
You understand? Okay, guys, 10 more minutes left. So let me know what's on your mind. Please, we encourage very, very open dialogue, casual conversation. So don't hold back. If there is any question on your mind, we can definitely focus on that in the next session as well. But I invite you to engage and participate as much as you can.
Do you want me to show anything on the EN? I've got some things on my screen here I can pop up.
I think what we could do, Ed, if it is agreeable to you, maybe have a focused theme on that topic.
Sure.
In our session. That way we won't rush through it. We have only kind of 10 minutes left. But
yeah, the only thing I thought of here was just putting the SEN announcement that's on their website up, and people could look at that, because it just tells you a little bit about how this is progressing.
Put it up.
Go ahead.
I'm interested.
Go ahead. Please share that then.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me find it here. Now, SEN, you have to realize, is an organization in Europe that develops standards. They have teams and everything, and they coordinate with ISO. And then there's CENELEC, which is the electrical standards group, and they sometimes work together because 14971 is a joint standard between IEC and ISO. It was a joint standard between CEN and CENELEC. So you can go look this up on the website. It's not easy to find. It took me a while to find it, but here's the announcement. And what it talks about is the date of ratification and the date of availability. The availability was 12/8/2021. So last week, they made it available to the people that actually publish the standards, which would be like DEN and ASPOR and BSI and those kind of people actually publish the standards. Okay, so the standard has been sent to those organizations to publish, and they have to have it published by 3/31/2022. Okay, the date of publication by the competent authorities for the local countries is 6/30, and at that date they also have to withdraw any conflicting standards. So it has an abstract on that, but the key statement is down here at the bottom under legal, and it's titled directives. I don't know why it says that, but here's the two laws, the MDR and the IVDR, and it says citation expected for the MDR and IVDR. So in other words, this has been submitted. It is going through the process of joining the list, which will be the next list published in the official journal. Now, an interesting aspect is 1345 went through the same process, and in September, it was made available. So it's already been published, it's out there. I know BSI has a copy available, which also includes, instead of Annex ZA and ZB, which are for the MDR and IVDR, it also has an NZ for the British standards, which is for the UK regulations. But they're the only ones, of course, have done that. But anyway, the next list, which should appear by the end of this year, should include both 14971 and 13485. So those are kinds of things that you should expect to see from a standard supplier near you.
Okay, so Ed, then are you saying then that on the 31st of March of 2022, ISO 14971 will become harmonized?
No, it has to be accepted by the competent authorities on that date. It will be harmonized whenever it's published in the official journal. The day it's published in the official journal, it becomes harmonized.
That's on this page. It says 6/30, so June 30th of 2022 is
well,
expected.
That's, you got to read those notes down there, okay? And 1, 2, 4 says date of publication, latest date by which an EN has to be implemented at a national level. That's by the competent authorities, by publication of an identical national standard or by endorsement, okay? And then they have to withdraw by the June date any standards conflicting with an EN, okay? And so you have to read the fine print, I guess is what I want to say.
This is kind of strange because I thought 14971. Oh no, okay. So it's conforming to the regulation, the EU-MDR. Okay.
Yeah. So now here's the version you look for. Again, EN ISO 14971 2019/A11 2021. The A11 is the amendment, okay? Because it's a European amendment, it got the number 11, okay? It's only an amendment to the European version. It's not an amendment to the ISO version. So you'll only be able to find this amended version by purchasing an EN standard. You're not going to be able to find it with an ISO version of the standard. So you got to go to your European standard supplier to get this.
Yeah, and you said it has become available on the 8th of December to European notified bodies.
Well, it's been available to the standard suppliers.
Ah, okay.
Okay, so and I know when 1345 happened, it didn't take too long for BSI to publish it. It was within the month of September that this all happened in 1345. So
so we should be able to purchase it soon from the standard suppliers.
And the English versions are going to be easy to do. It's when you have the other national languages that come along that have to have translations that's going to take a little longer, and that's why they made the date out there for the date of publication and all that out there far enough so that to allow the translations.
Great, thank you for sharing this, Ed. still a lot of moving parts is what I take away from this.
Exactly.
Yes. So, but thank you. Okay, guys. So 2 minutes left in our session today. Again, I want to close by just thanking everybody. Again, I want to show you very quickly, if you are already not a member of the Knowledge Sharing Forum, if you could join that, because that's how we are sharing the early sort of recordings of our Q&A sessions. And you will get a link as part of the follow-up. And also you will get a link for the feedback. And I would really appreciate your feedback about the session and what we should be doing next year. What would be more valuable to you? I'm very flexible and very open, because I want to make this work for all of you and have continuing this dialogue and conversation. This is how I differentiate this session with other webinars you might be joining, which are a lot more of a deep dive and more of a presentation, but not as potentially as engaging as I would like this to be. But we are open and flexible. So please take a few minutes to give me that feedback that you will receive the link for as a follow-up email after this session. So again, I want to close by saying happy holidays to you all. Take some time, take some rest, because 2022 will begin again, with full energy and full momentum. And I hope all of you guys enjoy that time with the family and stay safe.